All right, guys and gals of the movement world, we're on the home stretch of our deep dive into Jonathan Taylor, the 2021 Mover of the Year. This week, we fast forward to week 17, a couple weeks left to go in the National Football League season. Obviously, this game ended up being of vital importance for the playoff chase between the Colts and the Raiders. Obviously, ultimately, the Raiders ended up making it with a win this week in week 17 versus the Colts. The Colts losing the following week in week 18, even when they held the cards to the Jacksonville Jaguars, as we're about to see in our last and final installment of our deep dive. And obviously, the Colts going on to miss the playoffs, obviously. But this that all sort of sets the precedence. It sets the platform, the palette, if you will, that is the key performance inhibitors, the arousal, the pressure, the anxiety, and obviously we have accumulated fatigue starting to take its toll amongst all players, at least those who've accumulated a certain amount of repetitions here across the course of the National Football League season. A starting NFL running back certainly fits that bill. So I was really curious to see what we were going to find from Jonathan Taylor in this deep dive when we're talking about last week in week 16 versus the Arizona Cardinals, this week in week 17 versus the Las Vegas Raiders, and then next week against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, across conditions, when players' movement tendencies, when their capabilities are changing over the course of the National Football League season, we have to continue to see how it is that they solve problems, how it is that their behavior continues to emerge. The great thing about Jonathan Taylor, when the lights were brightest, he continued to shine. Now, again, back in Indianapolis here on this respective week, you can see the Colts are already a little behind the eight ball just early in the second quarter, and it's 10-0 already. Raiders end up winning this game, I think 23-20, if I'm not mistaken, but not to the fault of number 28, Jonathan Taylor. And in this play, we're only going to see one this week or in this respective week. This one, the reason why I highlighted it and wanted to feature it is because I have been somewhat critical of Jonathan Taylor not necessarily accepting an affordance or opportunity to bounce it outside when the gap is there, when the opportunity is affording him that escapability to the bounce or bounceability to the outside, if we want to think about it like that. So, again, 100% speed. Let's go ahead and watch it through as we typically would. And of course, after I say that, I realized I have it on 50% playback speed, but that's okay. We'll get to that point in a hiccup here ourselves. So I want you to see that after already telling you that he was about to bounce it outside, I think you could probably see what it is that was coming. And we only have one view here that is going to be accessible to us at this moment for this analysis, but that's okay. We're going to do that, which what we can to tell that movement problem solving story for Jonathan Taylor after having seen him now a good amount over the course of the National Football League season. One more time here at 100% speed before we get at that 50 and try to get a determination as to what is feeding into the channeling of this movement behavior at 50% speed. A few things first and foremost, there's a couple of local movement problems that are channeling this more globalistic, uh, unfolding, changing state of organization or the problem disposition. Remember, we're doing this in a snapshot type of version, but movement problems and movement solutions, we don't know where one ends and another one begins. So even though I'm nicely and neatly telling you, like, here's one local movement problem, and then once that problem is solved, we sort of move on to the next one. Of course, they're dynamically interconnected, just as the processes of the movement solution composition, perceptions, decisions, and intentions, and other cognitions, and then ultimately actions, right? In this conglomerate, this holistic, this integrated, intertwined, entangled, whatever word you want to use to describe this process, just like the movement solution has that type of changing state of organization, which is dynamically and continually unfolding, so will the movement problem. Okay. But a few things that I want to mention when we're talking about this first local movement problem here after he gets the ball and enters this huge sea or landscape of opportunities. And when I say see, you start to see the prowess of the blocking prowess of the offensive line of the Indianapolis Colts and very willing blockers at the tight end and wide receiver position as well. Not every running back is afforded this opportunity to be able to solve problems in this really ownership oriented fashion. The teams with lesser offensive lines, where there's guys up in their face because blocking assignments are being missed and the space isn't there to be had, obviously have to adapt in much different ways than Jonathan Taylor is allowed the opportunity to do so. But one of those things that I talked about is over time, even in the course of the National Football League season, if we were to think back to week 7 and week 8 and week 9, and then again when he was mover of the week or all our movement play of the week when he faced the Buffalo Bills and scored the 5 touchdowns, we started to see this really attuned and adaptable nature from Jonathan Taylor, but we also saw an ownership, an ownership of himself and a connection with the world as he found his way through it. Okay. Really high level stuff that you can sort of feel as an energy and an aura when he's moving now. Okay. And this should not, I don't want this to be lost on you guys as listeners because I think it feeds into that, which what he's doing. I didn't mean to hit us ahead there. So let's take us back to, the line of scrimmage here is at the 47-yard line. Let's take us back to the 45, 46, 47. And when we think about the dynamic emerging opportunities, the landscape of affordances that exist here, they are varied. There are simultaneous affordances. And when I say simultaneous, just means they're being presented to the player at the same time, but they are all dependent on when that player takes them in. They're frame dependent. They're also individual dependent as to if and when the performer or the player wants to act upon them. But let's look at some of these potential affordances. We can see what he might be looking to. Okay. This is where his perception could be. And again, we can speculate as to what he's attuning to. We see Quentin Nelson, number 56 here. Usually the two kind of go hand in hand now through over these last 2 seasons for Jonathan Taylor, his second season coming to a completion here in the National Football League. All pro guard in Quentin Nelson, probably the best doing it. Jonathan Taylor has intentions, skilled intentionality to stay open and responsive, certainly, but he often picks up 56, knowing that 56 is going to clear a way for him. That's what actually makes the affordance that he accepts, and obviously rejecting an affordance that is presented from the behaviors of Nelson, somewhat surprising here, because usually, like I said, the two are very well connected to one another, or Taylor at least is connected to the behaviors of Nelson. So when we see him approaching the line of scrimmage here, and he's 2 yards away, yard and a half, 2 yards away here. We know now that we can see, depending on what he's looking at and when he's looking at it, there are a whole host of places that he could potentially go as he looks to solve this problem in his own unique, peculiar, and authentic way, correct? So when we observe this, we can be somewhat surprised that he didn't follow Nelson in the hole that's here, because if we really look at that, what is going to unfold in this space, and again, I know it's hard to tell from this respective view, but if you really look at it and think about players and their size, and you're kind of like scaling that, also look at the logo of the helmet on the field. This is a pretty big gap that typically a Jonathan Taylor who loves to be in that traffic. He loves to be navigating through that traffic in his own ownership fashion. I'm surprised he didn't go there. I'm also surprised to a certain degree that if we look at this middle affordance, okay, that he didn't run up in here and then look for an opportunity to either go back to the middle of the field or go then back to the outside. But instead, he seems to allow this decision to be made pretty clearly, fairly early. Okay. And that decision, of course, ultimately is to go more in this path. Still a very inviting affordance, obviously. And why is that an inviting affordance? Pretty big gap of space here. and it stays big. And a player here in number 29, a defensive back, smaller in stature, not necessarily specifically a corner, who is going to want to take on one in the open field a 225-pound running back who has some strength and power capabilities, as well as the ability to make you miss or run away from you. Defensive backs don't want any part of that. And that probably played in to how it is that Jonathan Taylor elected to act. Again, remember, he has agency here in accepting this respective affordance, but to accept an affordance means or equates to one rejecting other affordances, especially when they are also very inviting right here to the middle of the field, even though we know we got a safety back here, running up into this traffic, making a decision a little later. But what we see from Jonathan Taylor is he trusts what his eyes are picking up and he already starts to move in this way and in this fashion. Okay. Now, as I took you a couple steps ahead, let's do so again, because as he makes this cut to move into this gap and get into this 1v1 local movement problem, okay, watch the behaviors of the two in a conditionally coupled, reciprocally coupled fashion. Okay. Remember, player and environment, mutual reciprocal relationship. As part of that problem, there are other opponents, and one's opponent's behaviors afford certain behaviors of oneself, specifically the ball carrier, right? I know I constantly repeat that and belabor that, but it is worth repeating in this movement problem solver paradigm. So when he sees him, he being Taylor and him being, I think that's Casey Hayward. Does Casey Hayward still play in Las Vegas? Whoever that is, number 21, and I believe it is. But that's neither here nor there. It's sort of irrelevant to the comment at this point, because this is an alive movement problem, and he being Taylor is then taking in information, detecting information about a couple of different things here. And now they could all be key candidate control parameters of this respective dyadic system. It could be movement behaviors. Look at the position or the pattern that 29 is in the midst of executing in. So a quick glance, even though this is happening again in real time. So we have to think about what would be most specifying to Jonathan Taylor at this moment. It could be, as he's picking up that affordance, it could be, let me get my double arrow here. It could be interpersonal distance, which is telling him, again, knowing that I believe that Jonathan Taylor is very sensitive and attuned to interpersonal distance, this metastable zone and region. He's very sensitive to what opportunities exist there as guys get closer or further away. And I think that actually is really what is the candidate control parameter, if I were to guess here, of this respective system behavior. It could be colors. He knows, and that obviously his guys wear blue, and the other team at this case wears white and silver. Whether it's silver helmet, white jersey, silver pants, those flashes of colors can be informative. I talked about that a little bit in our movement play of the week. I believe it was the Tyler Huntley play, but I could be mistaken on that. Of course, colors can be informative as well, or just looking for space. In that space being that which what opens up back here as 29 acts in a given fashion. Okay. All potential key candidate control parameters of this respective behavior for Jonathan Taylor. Okay. But watch when he perceives him and picks him up now. Okay. As he perceives and picks him up, he actually continues to act to get an online perceptual pickup. Observe. 2 steps, continues to act. Movement mechanics, body position and posture changes from 29. Let's not miss it. Okay. And all of this is information movement coupling. He continues to act. He takes those 2 steps in, pulls 29 into him, gets him in a poor position, and now in very tight space, a 1v1 scenario or situation, we see Adaptability within adaptability of this guy right here. Look at this position that he's in. Okay. Jonathan Taylor right here, this left foot forward type of stagger, interpersonal distance. Not only is he sensitive to it, but he's adaptable around it. Do not miss this. Okay. This left leg forward stagger then takes him into his jump cut. Okay. But the jump cut is flexibly adjusted and adapted differently than we saw it earlier this season, where typically it is exaggerated, whether it's left or right. It is typically more exaggerated, covering more ground. Here it's subtle, flexibly adjusted and adapted. Oops, sorry about that. Flexibly and adaptively adjusted to meet the needs of this specific peculiar problem, where that opponent is and in relation to him, to put him back into this reacceleration mode. It's just this little jump cut, pseudo modified skip step. Okay. Not very exaggerated whatsoever. Where typically we see some of these jump cuts from him where they're violent, they're big, they're exaggerated. This one is subtle. This one is flexibly and adaptively adjusted. Why? Because he's got a guy tight to him. He still has that feeler out in that right arm. He knows that interpersonal distance. He's combining these movement actions. But also, here's the other thing that's driving this. Look at this. Okay, here's the nearest defender after this dyadic relationship, and there's a whole hell of a lot of space from hashes to sideline that Jonathan Taylor knows and is calling for him. Okay, I know that seems really philosophical, kind of metaphysical, if you will, and I believe that it is that energy that's sort of like calling for him to a certain degree to come onto it. This adaptability within that adaptability, from that skip step and into that jump cut, there's that hand again. That stiff arm is also flexibly adjustable and adapted to meet the needs. We see it right here as the feeler to get 29 off of him. And now we see that hand getting ready to come up again to protect himself and to work as that haptic touch feeler yet again. Okay. And then for good measure, let's pick up as many yards as we possibly can. So we see all of this, various strategies, an abundance of strategies, flexible, adaptable strategies at that. And when we see those types of flexible and adjustable strategies, we have to know that there's something dexterous, or that they are leading into that something dexterous, that expression that it is that we are witnessing from the NFL's most skilled mover that is currently doing it. Some pretty high level stuff yet again now in week 17 from Jonathan Taylor, as he looks to exploit that what the problem is asking and offering him.